Hey, everybody. So thanks for showing up. How are the hangovers, by the way? How's everybody feeling? Decent enough? Cool. So let's talk about this thing that I made. So my name is Jared Haight. I'm a pen tester with Gotham Digital. I've been a PowerShell fan since my previous life as a sysadmin. It's really what introduced me to scripting. And moving into InfoSec, I was super excited to see that there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on in the InfoSec community related to PowerShell. I've always shied away from defining myself as a developer, but I keep developing things and then releasing them, which I think is by definition what makes a developer. So I'll own up to that label now. And along with my wife, I'm the co-owner of a broken bunny. His name is Bruiser, and he got sick a while ago, and now his head is stuck, tilted. So he looks really, really cute and very, very curious at all times. So looking around, I noticed CarolinaCon is definitely a graybeard con. Definitely some older folk here, some Linux gray hats. So let's just start out with an introduction to what the hell is PowerShell. PowerShell is a scripting language that Microsoft came up with a while ago. It was built into Windows 7 when it came out. And it's this really powerful language that's built into .NET. So what makes it cool is outside of the built-in tools that you get with PowerShell, you also get full access to everything that's in .NET. And you get a lot of great methods to interact with COM and WMI and all these native ways to manage Windows. It's a object-oriented language, so that makes it really easy to work around the system. A great example of that is they've rewritten ping so that when you ping something, it actually returns an object. And that'll include like the response time, TTL, all sorts of stuff that like actually makes ping more powerful. The command structure in PowerShell has a verb-noun sort of vernacular. It makes the language really verbose, but it also makes it intuitive. For example, if you have get content, which is going to read content from a file, set content is how you write content to a file. So it's kind of easy to intuit, how to use PowerShell. The other cool thing is the help system is actually usable. It's a lot like man pages from Linux. The dude that created PowerShell actually came from a Linux background. So you'll see a lot of nods to Linux scripting to the point that there are built-in aliases for ls, wget, curl, right in PowerShell, which is pretty cool. PowerShell also has really great tab completion. It's tab completion for, okay. Oops. Sorry about that. It has great tab completion for commands, as well as the parameters for those commands, file paths, pretty much anything in PowerShell you can tab complete. It's a really great, easy language to use. It's being used these days mainly for administering networks. Microsoft is moving all of their management basically over to PowerShell. And you see that manifesting itself in things like the new versions of the Exchange console, new versions of the Active Directory Administrative Center. These are all just kind of GUI front ends for PowerShell commands, to the point that you can enable a window that will show you all of the PowerShell commands that are running in the background. Microsoft also is using it for automation. So if you're familiar with Chef or Puppet, Microsoft has something called desired state config, which is kind of their take on Puppet or Ansible, except a lot more complicated. I've tried to use it as a sysadmin and gave up and just used Puppet instead. Because actually Puppet on Windows was a lot easier to use than desired state config. In the InfoSec community, people are just grabbing onto PowerShell. There's really a lot of great stuff going on in the data forensics or incident response side of the house. A lot of work being done on like real low-level disk analysis, since PowerShell is a modern language, it is very network aware. So it's really easy to do like queries for like event logs or WMI across an entire network. All this makes it super easy to, do incident response, do investigation across your whole network for, malicious events or, what have you. There's also a lot of good work. I'm not going to be talking a lot about the blue team or incident response side of things, but if you are interested in that, check out invoke-ir.com. There's the guy that runs that, Jared Haight, does like amazing work with PowerShell. Last time I checked, he had a blog entry on the front of his page where it was like low-level disk analytics, where he's like looking at blocks on a disk using PowerShell, which is not something you would expect from just a scripting language. But we're red teams, so we want to break stuff, right? So what can we do with PowerShell to break stuff? Well, the great thing about it is PowerShell is what the admins are using to manage their networks. So that means if we get on an admin's box, we can manage their network for them. It's also really, really hard to lock down. Because PowerShell uses this scary console that you type in, Windows admins aren't really aware of it. So in a lot of cases, they don't lock it down. There's just zero awareness of it. What actually led to me creating PS Attack is I had a friend that was on an engagement, and he landed on this terminal server, and it was really well locked down. You couldn't open Explorer, you couldn't open Command Prompt, you could open PowerShell, though. So him and I, we were going back over like text message back and forth, like, okay, try this, The admins just weren't aware. So it's this great tool to use. Once you start getting into the tools side, some of the work that's being done by the offensive community, there's a lot of really cool advanced level stuff going on. You'll see a lot of stuff like DLL injection or WMI abuse, which is something that Manifestation on Twitter has been doing some work on. And what's great about this is the community is really led by these guys that they've been doing this for a long time. So they bring with them a very mature methodology to PowerShell. And that kind of comes from two angles. So from the pen tester angle, you see a lot of focus on not leaving a trace or reusing tools that are already on the box. A lot of in-memory attacks, stuff like that. And then on the flip side, more from the development end, they're very big on following the conventions that PowerShell has kind of built up within itself. So supporting that help system. Every command is going to have like a get help function where you can get a man page out of it. Every command is going to use similar switches that you see in other PowerShell commandlets. So the offensive community does a good job of just making their tools work like you'd expect a PowerShell tool to work. So all of this is awesome, but I've noticed that as great as PowerShell is, there is this kind of barrier to entry that people are kind of aware that there's some cool stuff going on in PowerShell, but if you put your standard pen tester in front of a PowerShell console, they wouldn't know what to do with it. And I think a lot of that is, Windows isn't the cool thing to like focus on or really pay attention to. All your cool works, you're seeing stuff done in like Python on Linux and stuff like that. The development side of Windows just isn't as interesting or glamorous as what you would see on the Linux side. And the other side is, it can be intimidating. There's a lot of pen testers that have a hard enough time doing something productive with Python. Like now you're telling me to learn this language that is kind of this Windows niche. It's not on their list of priorities. And then I mentioned that the general populace is kind of aware of that there is some cool stuff going on in PowerShell, but they don't know the specifics. And that's because there's kind of this like PowerShell clique on Twitter where, there's a lot of cool shit going on, but unless you're following that circle, you're probably not aware, like that stuff doesn't kind of surface out of that, little tiny click. So that's kind of what led me to build PS Attack. So PS Attack is a custom PowerShell console designed for offensive use. It includes a lot of the best offensive utilities that are available in the PowerShell community, just right there embedded into it. It also tries to emulate the PowerShell console experience. So that includes using really powerful tab completion. All the commands, you're running PowerShell commands in PS Attack. So if you are familiar with PowerShell as it is right now, then you can just kind of jump into PS Attack and get going. If you're not familiar with PowerShell, you can kind of learn, get your chops, and then apply those to other instances. You know, when you kind of start getting involved with Empire or land at a PowerShell prompt that isn't PS Attack, you'll know what to do. The other thing that, I wanted to make the barrier to entry as low as possible. So it is a single executable. There's no setup, there's no install. You download this executable and run it on and get hacking. So within PS Attack, there are over 110 commands that cover the entire range of a pen test engagement. So recon, privilege escalation, backdoors, a lot of great work on recon. I will be showing that later. It includes a lot of commands from frameworks that you might be familiar with, Power Tools, PowerSploit, Nishang. These are really big projects. They're just these giant, like, monolithic collections of offensive tools, and they're all awesome. I also wanted to surface some of the lesser known tools in PS Attack. So it includes Invoke, which if you're familiar with Responder, it's basically Responder but in PowerShell. So it can do SMB relay, it can do basically capturing credentials and stuff by spoofing like the WPAD, proxy address, a lot of really great work being done there. The other thing it includes is PowerCat, which is Netcat, but in PowerShell, as evidenced by its name. What's cool about PowerCat, I found out, so like Netcat, how you can do -E, execute bash and throw that at a reverse IP and get your shell, PowerCat will do the same thing, except it throws back a PowerShell shell. What's cool about running PowerCat within PS Attack, though, is the PowerShell session it sends out has all of the tools in PS Attack already in it. So it's like this fully weaponized shell that you're sending back to your IP. It's pretty cool. So with 110 commands, that's still overwhelming. Like, you're sitting at this prompt, you still have no idea what to do. So I wrote a command called getattack. And what getattack does is it acts as like a search engine for attack tool or attack commands. So that's a little bit small on the screen, but basically you can give it any string and it's going to search through all the commands in PS Attack and return a list of whatever it is that matches your query. So in this case, we're looking for passwords. We can see that we got Mimikatz, we got GPP password, et cetera, kind of listed through. With building PS Attack, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just for the lab. I wanted to build something that would actually be useful on live engagements. So one of the things I'm doing is the payloads, these raw offensive PowerShell scripts, they're encrypted before they are compiled into PS Attack. And then when you start PS Attack, it takes those encrypted payloads and it decrypts them straight into memory. So the decrypted plaintext payloads never actually touch disk. AV's gotten a little bit better about detecting some of the more common or more popular offensive PowerShell scripts like Mimikatz. So this kind of avoids that because there's nothing for AV to detect. Also, since it's a custom console, it doesn't actually touch PowerShell.exe. It's all called through .NET and kind of subverts that. So in the event that you do land on a box where PowerShell.exe is blocked, they can't really block the .NET DLLs. So this should still work under pretty much any circumstance. You'll be able to execute PowerShell code. The other cool thing is I wanted to focus on making sure that this worked everywhere. So PS Attack targets .NET 3.5, which means that it works on anything from a clean install of Windows 7 all the way up through a fully patched version of Windows 10. That one executable will run across everything. No, that's a great question. Ask that when I'm asking questions. Short answer, no. So the other cool thing is it is just a PowerShell console. So you do have access to get help, which, like I said, is PowerShell's kind of man page equivalent. Any command in PS Attack, be it a native PowerShell command or something that was included by the offensive community, will support get-help and kind of give you an example of how to use it, give you the parameters that it accepts, stuff like that. All right, so enough talking. let's kind of do a demo here, and hopefully it doesn't blow up. So in this case, we are on a, I don't know, we found a desktop, it was unlocked. We had PS attack on our USB key. We're going to go ahead and run it. Is that good for everybody? Can everybody in the back see what's going on? All right, cool. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to want to do is see if I can find some passwords on the network. So what I can do here is just run git attack passwords. And it's going to return a list of, like I said, everything that has passwords or involves passwords. A lot of that is the Invoke stuff, which is going to be able to sniff hashes and stuff like that. What we're interested in, though, is get GPP password. GPP password. If you're not familiar, so admins in a Windows domain have the ability to set passwords through group policy. They would do this to set like local admin accounts. You can set your passwords through that, or if you have a scheduled task that you want to run under specific credentials, you can use group policy to define all of that. And Microsoft was forward thinking. They encrypted this password string that gets sent out to all the computers. They were then super helpful and published the encryption string to MSDN. So now, when you try to do this in a modern Windows domain, you usually get a prompt that says, hey, this is a really bad idea. You shouldn't do this. But legacy Windows domains have a ton of this stuff. So it's a great little like kidney punch to get a free password. So let's go ahead and run get GPP password. Cool. So we got a hit. The account name is robot. We have its password, and it looks like this was set for a scheduled task or something like that in the network. So the next thing I want to do is get a little bit more information about this robot account. So I'm going to do a search for Active Directory stuff, because I want to query Active Directory. So there is, like I said, a lot of recon stuff in PS Attack, and all of that is really provided by the PowerView module, which was written by Harmjoy, I believe. Lot of really great just ways to figure out what's going on in the environment. A lot of great tools. We're looking specifically for user-related stuff. So we have getNet user. Query information for a given user in a domain sounds like exactly what we were looking for. Let's go ahead and just do get help, see, because I haven't run getNet user before. I actually have. I've done this demo a billion times. So get help. Cool. Looks like exactly what we'd expect. We can give it a username. We can specify a domain. So let's just go ahead and do getNet user. Username robot. Cool. So we get all the information from AD, login count, the last time they had a bad password. Looks like this is a service account for stuff. What's interesting to us, though, is he's a member of a group called Local Admin, which sounds really promising. So what I want to do is I want to find out more about that group. So let's do another search to see what we have as far as groups are concerned. All right, so we want to see, it says local admin. Let's look at the local groups on the computer, see if that actually matches the way we'd like it to. So getNet local group looks good. Again, we'll do a get help. So we can specify a computer name if we want to run it against a remote computer. That's cool. But it looks like we just have to specify like a group name, and this should work out just fine. So getNet local group. Group name, administrators. All right, so this is everybody that's in the local administrator group on this computer. We have an administrator account, an admin account, domain admins, and our local admin group. So that robot account should have local admin on this box. So let's go ahead and restart PS Attack. We're going to run it as that local admin account, though. That's not his password. That's not his password either. There we go. All right, cool. So we got a local admin account. Looking at how it was, looking at how that group is set up, I'm kind of suspecting that that robot is going to have admin access to other boxes in the network. So let's do a search through git attack for local admin and see if we have any sort of recon stuff that we can do here. Perfect. PowerView provides a commandlet called find local admin access. This is going to find machines on the local domain that our current box has local admin on. All right, so 2 boxes, because I'm running this on a Mac with 16 gigs of RAM, and it's not going to run more than 2 boxes. Lab 7-2 and Lab 7-1. We're on 7-1, so 7-2 is another box in the network. The other thing I want to do is, so we know that we have admin access throughout the network, our 2-computer network. We want to find some domain admins, though, because we want to try to escalate our privileges. So we can do, I know that we have something for finding admins in here, so I can just do a search for find, and it's going to return everything back. This is my favorite command ever, because it's genius. Invoke user hunter. What invoke user hunter does is scans through the network and finds any computers that users in a specified group are logged into. So let's go ahead and look at the help for this. This is a mess. I don't want to decode. That's like 37 parameters. So one of the great things about Git help is you have the examples param. So the examples param is like your TLDR of a man page. So here we have 8 examples of how to use this command. The first one is exactly what we're looking for. Find machines on a local domain where domain admins are logged into, and we can check if we have local admin rights to it. So let's just go ahead and run that. Great. So we have a domain admin. His username is admin1, because I'm not original. And it looks like we do have local admin rights on it through this field right here. So we're going to run Mimikatz, because Mimikatz is great. If you're not familiar with Mimikatz, so Mimikatz is like this Swiss Army knife of credentials and tokens in a Windows environment. You can do all sorts of really interesting stuff, like creating your own tokens, spoofing, tokens, stuff like that. What most people use it for is dumping credentials, though. Mimikatz will run against a computer and dump the credentials that the LSASS process has in memory. Windows, after I think Windows 8.1, it did change things so that only hashes are stored in memory. Microsoft really helpfully provided a reg key that you can revert that behavior. So if you do have local admin rights on the box, you can just revert it, wait for somebody to log back in, and boom, you get their plain text creds. Since we are mimicking a pretty standard corporate environment here, we're on Windows 7, because why upgrade? And what's great about Windows 7 is Mimikatz works beautifully on Windows 7. The other cool thing about Mimikatz is I had mentioned reflective DLL injection before. So that comes into play with Mimikatz here. What Invoke Mimikatz does is you run it against a remote computer, and it injects the Mimikatz DLL straight into memory on that remote computer. So it never touches disk. Like I mentioned, AV is really good about detecting Mimikatz. This is a way that we can get around that. Usage is pretty straightforward. We just need to specify a computer name and some dump creds. So let's go ahead and do that. to dump credits. I hope that computer's on. Okay, cool. So we got our hit back. And you can see we have the hash for the actual computer account, which is great. We also have the admin's password. I think that's the first time anybody's clapped for one of my demos. That's pretty cool. All right, so we have domain creds. I want to kind of, get out of here. So what, not like here, but like here. So what I'm going to do is dump the Active Directory database. So ntds.dit. That way I can copy it to my USB key, I can pull it, the developer may be coming back from lunch or whatever soon here. So let's go ahead and start up PS Attack again, this time as the domain admin that we just got creds for. So consult my cheat sheet here. All right, so the first thing we need to do is find out what our domain controller is, because that's where ntds.dit is going to live. Git attack, domain controllers. And we have a hit for getnet domain controller, which is just going to return a list of the domain controllers in the network. All right, so we have one. Again, 16 gig Mac. And we get hits for all sorts of information about the DC, what FSMA roles it has, its IP address, what site it's in, and its host name. Next thing we want to do is figure out what we're going to do to copy ntds.dit off of this domain controller. So again, git attack and copy. There's a lot of tools for working with volume shadow copies in PS Attack. Volume shadow copies are really cool. They're a great way to get around file locks or access permissions, stuff like that. But we actually have a tool that's going to kind of handle all of this for us called Invoke Ninja Copy. What Invoke Ninja Copy does is really, really awesome. It actually analyzes the hard drive volume and then takes that data and parses it back into NTFS and recreates the files that way. So it does like this real low-level copy to the disk and kind of walks it back from there. Again, like not what you'd expect from just a scripting language. Really cool stuff. So let's look at what the commands are for Invoke Ninja Copy. And I'm lazy, so I'm just going to skip straight to the examples. Ninja Copy examples. All right, so read ntfs.dit from remote server, write it to a path on the local server. Great. So we need a path to what file we're looking for, computer name we're copying it from, and our local destination. Path. Computer name. That was Lab 2012 for the DC. And we're just going to copy it into the folder that we're working out of here. This does take a while because it is doing such a low-level access, so it's expected. All right, cool. So we're going to run ls because I'm lead like that. And we got our ncds.dit. Cool. So PS Attack, I think, is pretty awesome. I think it's a super helpful tool. I think, it is both useful for people new to PowerShell, people who already have experience with it, but it does have some shortcomings. So I have a big interest in evading antivirus. just because it's fun. It's an interesting challenge. And so while the strings are all encrypted in PS Attack, it's all the same strings. So whoever downloads, from the release page, psattack.exe, you're going to have the same strings as everybody else. The other thing is the PowerShell community is super, super active. So these tools are being improved all the time. And PS Attack, naturally, because it's a compiled binary, is going to have, older tools than what's currently available. So I created a build tool for PS Attack. The build tool makes it easy to build PS Attack, which is kind of fun because I'm going to make you compile stuff on Windows. What it does is it downloads the latest version of PS Attack, downloads the latest tools that it depends on, encrypts them with a unique key, and then compiles everything together. So at the end of this, you get a custom-made console that is unique for you, totally up to date, unique signatures, and it's super easy to use. So this is an example of running the build tool. So we start it, it downloads PS Attack, it downloads all the tools, it compiles it, and kicks out a custom copy of PS Attack. I love you guys so much. One of the cool things about the build tool is the dependencies are actually super reasonable. You need .NET 3.5 to build PS Attack, and then you need .NET 4.5 and up, maybe, to actually run the build tool. The reason you need .NET 3.5 is because backwards compatibility in .NET is atrocious, and so I just standardized on that. It makes things easier. You also need a JSON file called modules.json, and it's included with the zip file that you can download from GitHub, but modules.json is really just a list of the URLs for the tools that you're going to be downloading. And the cool thing about doing it with the JSON file is if you find something that you think is super cool that you want in your copy of PS Attack, it is really, really easy to add it. The other thing is, it helps if there's a bug introduced in, one of the PS files, you can easily roll back. So it makes it really easy to make this your own version of PS Attack. PS Attack is up on my GitHub. So that's github.com/Jared Haight. Or you can get it from www.psattack.com along with whatever random shit I have up on there. For the GitHub, pre-compiled versions are available on the Releases tab for both tools. And so that means basically all you have to do to run these tools is download the zip, unzip it, and run them. Neither have a setup process or anything like that. It's super easy to get involved or get started. So with CarolinaCon, I'm releasing version 1.0. I've had some betas and some release candidates kind of leading up to this, but this is the official, like, hey, it's not a burning pile of garbage release. But in the future, besides the obvious, like, bug fixes and, kind of staying up to date on modules, there's a couple things I am interested in involving with PS Attack, and that's better AV evasion. There's some console emulation stuff that isn't quite spot on that, I'm definitely going to work on. But I'm really curious to see what the community needs from this tool, like what would make things easier for you guys. One of the things I definitely want to work on is it is an interactive tool, so it doesn't play well with shells. And that's going to be kind of the focus, for the development for, the foreseeable future until I kind of iron that out. But it really comes down to, what do you guys want? You can let me know, like, please download this, play with it, and submit issues. If something's broken, if something doesn't work quite the way you think it should, or if there's a feature missing, just let me know. Like, don't be afraid to submit an issue. I'm not going to expect you to, like, have a fix for it. I just want to get some feedback. If you don't want to submit through GitHub, just reach out to me on Twitter or through my email, which will be at the end. But yeah, if you're feeling froggy and want to submit some pull requests, that would definitely be appreciated. This is my first like big C# project, so it's probably just a mess. And I would definitely appreciate some more mature eyes on it to let me know all the ways that I screwed up. Please be kind. I definitely want to mention PS Attack by itself actually isn't that advanced of a tool. It's pretty straightforward. What makes it awesome is the work of the PowerShell community. So I mentioned earlier this PowerShell click that, you know, kind of is where all this cool stuff is happening. This is kind of the entry to that click. If you are slightly interested in PowerShell and offensive PowerShell, these guys are doing all of the like most amazing work out there. You know, we got people from Empire on there. Manifestation runs PowerShell Mafia along with a couple of other guys, which kind of is what PowerSploit and PowerTools kind of merged into. Kevin Robertson did Invoke, and he's doing a lot of really cool stuff. I want to say he's kind of an up-and-coming guy. He just kind of like appeared with like, boom, check this out, and is doing just really cool stuff. And Nicole Mitt, that dude's devious. If you check out the Nishang framework, which is what he's responsible for, he has a lot of just really off-the-wall like approaches to backdoors and stuff like that. So just all really cool people. You should definitely follow them on Twitter. I'm incredibly grateful for their work. So there's my email address and my Twitter handle. If you're in the Charlotte area, me and some friends, we meet up monthly for what we call Charlotte Hackers Anonymous. And basically, it's a red team meetup where we just talk about, you know, red team stuff and then drink beer and eat food afterwards. So it's a cool group. I definitely encourage everybody to show up. I made some good friends through there, learned a lot of stuff. That's it. So I'll happily take questions. I'll start with you because you had asked first. The question was, is it able to evade logging, which was introduced in PowerShell 5? So Microsoft made a lot of changes with PowerShell version 5 that are good for the end user and bad if you are trying to develop evil PowerShell tools. So some of the things that it does is logging is 1 billion times better in PowerShell to the point of like there's too much logging now. Which is probably a good thing. The other thing it does is through Windows Defender. Windows Defender introduced a new module that sits in front of the scripting host where like all scripts are run, be it Visual Basic, PowerShell, whatever. And this module basically looks at scripts right before they run and determines, hey, is this malicious or not? So it gets past encoding, you know, you're past all that stage. The encryption that PS Attack does, like all of that is kind of moot because it's right before it gets executed. I've already seen the PowerShell community kind of adjust for that. So one of the things you'll notice if you run the build tool is I mentioned like, hey, you're going to download some stuff and AV might not like it. You know, go ahead and disable it. Windows Defender will catch like 3 of the scripts that PS Attack uses. Surprisingly enough, Mimikatz is no longer one of those. So they've obviously made some changes recently that kind of evade that. And I expect we'll see that more as time goes on. My take on it is that right now, Windows Defender is the only antivirus I'm aware of that is using that module. It is open, other AVs can use it, but we at least have a little bit of a window here before AVs start using it, you know, especially in corporate enterprises where you're still running like Semantic Enterprise 11 or something like that. Like, you'll probably still have a real good range of success using PS Attack in an actual environment. And the same goes back to that logging as well. PowerShell, like I said, introducing a lot of cool stuff, but the Windows admins aren't catching up. You know, they're as unaware of PowerShell as like the InfoSec community is, maybe more so, honestly. So it's still ripe for the harvest, but things are changing. So any other questions? Back here? Not yet, though that is a great idea. And if you would like to submit an issue for that, I would really appreciate that. Sorry, the question was, is there a way to run PS Attack without letting it touch disk? And right now, just because of nature it is an interactive console, it is kind of how it was built. But that is, like I said, kind of the focus going forward is how can I make this work over reverse shells? How can I make this work without touching disk? So it's coming, I hope. I think you were next. Yes. I'm so glad you mentioned that because I forgot to mention that. So PowerShell has an execution policy. So when you try to import a script that's from the internet, by default it's going to say, hey, this is from the internet, it's probably bad, don't run it. And I won't let you run it. So you can change that execution policy. But you require, by default, the way most people would change it, you need to be an admin on the box to update it. What I found out in developing PS Attack is the set execution policy command has options. Those options are -current user, or use -scope, and then you can specify current user, which you don't need admin rights for because that touches the HKCU reg key, or -process, where just for this process, it's going to go ahead and disable execution policy. When PS Attack starts up, the very first thing it does is disables execution policy for its process. So. Thanks. That's very true. So another way you can get around the execution policy is just basically, instead of calling the script as a file, you can either just copy and paste the contents of the script straight into PowerShell, or you can save it to like a text file and invoke that text file. So there's, Jeffrey Snover, the guy that created PowerShell, has gone on record of saying, like, look, this was never designed to be a security policy, but they wouldn't let me name it like, hey, this isn't a fucking security policy, so we get what we get. Any other questions? Sure. I did write all of this. So it took, I don't know, about 4 or 5 months of work. And I mean, that was a lot of work. I would say I'd probably put 80 to 100 hours in it. And that was coming up from like not really having any idea, what to do with C# to this point. PowerShell is, creating your own PowerShell console is complicated and not well documented. So I ended up referencing a lot of other projects to do that. Ben 10 has the PowerShell framework, which he created for incident response teams, and it's a custom PowerShell console. And so referencing the previous talk, how to copy and paste code from Stack Overflow, this was how to copy and paste code from GitHub. So I think I understand what most of it does, but there's probably a couple lines in there that, I don't know. It works. So, cool. Any other questions? Yeah. So the question is, what was the hardest part about writing this, and what took the most time versus the least time? So the hardest part about writing this is actually the typing itself. And there may be an easier way to do this. But my original idea was to use readline. So if you're not familiar with scripting or C or whatever, readline basically says like, hey, I'm going to prompt the user for input. And they're going to type, and once they hit enter, I'm going to take that input and use it. So this would be super easy because, okay, you type git-attack, you hit enter, I take that, I execute it as PowerShell code. The problem was I couldn't figure out an easy way to make that work with tab. And for me, tab completion was absolutely essential for this. So what I ended up doing is basically rewriting the entire console so that anytime you hit a key, I'm analyzing it and like making decisions based off of it. So all of the edge cases that come out of that, for a while there were builds where like, if you hit left on the keyboard, it just appended an invisible left character to the string and just kind of kept moving out. So I think I've worked through all of that, but yeah, that was definitely the hardest part. The easiest part was, God, in hindsight, I don't think any of this was super easy. Getting the color to be blue, that was pretty easy. So, any other questions? Yep. So I had to write the auto-completion. I ended up writing the auto-completion myself. And so about after I'd put, I don't know, auto-completion is up there and also one of the hardest things about this. After I put like 15, 20 hours into auto-completion, another custom PowerShell project came out. So I was, fuckers stealing my ideas, like great. But it's all good. We can learn from each other. I got over that quickly. In their release, they had mentioned like, oh yeah, we're just going to use this tab expansion like to do autocomplete. So it turns out PowerShell actually, pragmatically through .NET, will let you use its own tab completion. I'm going to stand by my custom implementation because between PowerShell version 2 and version 3, they changed how tab completion worked. So if I wanted this to work across all versions of PowerShell, I'd have to like detect what version of tab completion it was. Honestly, it would probably be easier, but I put so much work into like the existing tab completion. I was like, it's going to work against everything, so we'll just leave it as is. So. Any other questions? Yeah. I have not, because I don't have a license for Cobalt Strike. So if you would like to donate that towards development, that would be much grateful, and I will totally check that out. Any other? Oh, over here. Also a great question. If I was going to defend against PS attack, what would I do? So there are, and I wish I knew them off the top of my head or had references for this. If you go through Manifestation's Twitter feed, he's done a lot of like posts on, here are WMI queries that will catch like weird movement throughout your network. So stuff like reflective loading DLLs or impersonating tokens and stuff you wouldn't expect from a computer, within your, at least from your end users. And so that's really, I don't know that there's anything you can do necessarily. I don't know what you could do to protect PS attack from running, but at least detecting it. There's a lot of WMI queries that you could use to that end. You really can't, that I'm aware of, because it's part of .NET. So PowerShell isn't just PowerShell.exe, it's actually like .NET assemblies. So like PowerShell.exe is doing a lot the same stuff I am, just better, because they're highly paid developers, and I did this in my free time. But it's essentially the same thing. They're creating a PowerShell console that's using .NET in the background to execute PowerShell. So I'm not aware of a way to actually disable PowerShell. I have a friend that works at a bank in Charlotte that he says they've done this. And I'm like, dude, you got to run PS attack. Let me know like what happens. And so far, I haven't heard back. So we'll see. Yep. Yeah, Windows XP would totally be. If you want to mitigate this by running Windows XP, let me give you my card so we can arrange for like, an assessment from Gotham. Okay, great. Any other questions? Sure. Yep, yeah, that was Harmjoy and Sixto. They are awesome. You're good to go. Yeah. So, cool. All right, guys. Well, I appreciate it. And